allegedly killed MIT officer Sean Collier.
The biggest story in town is unfolding inside the Moakley Courthouse, but because no cameras are allowed in federal court, news photographers are left out in the cold. But 2 years after the marathon bombings, there is one way for the public to watch the trial on TV. Head to the 7th floor overflow room here at the courthouse, where you can view the proceedings on a closed-circuit monitor. As court sketch artist Jane Collins can tell you, it's not a great picture.
They're so far away and so small.
You can't blame Collins for wanting a better view. With only pastels and paper, her job is to do what these cameras are not allowed to: capture the courtroom action. And that TV monitor in the overflow room, while far from ideal, allows her to see defendant Johar Tsarnaev's face, something she can't see in the courtroom, even when she's sitting just a few feet away.
We have a one seat, we can't move. So we're always trying to get a glimpse of him when he first walks in, and then reimagine it on the drawing, because all we ever see is the back of his head.
The sketches are front page news. So here's the question: how closely do they resemble Tsarnaev?
And I think she actually does a pretty good job of capturing what is going on in the courtroom, what his mannerisms are like.
Mass Live reporter Garrett Quinn is a courtroom regular and, like the sketch artists, sits behind the defendant.
The only people that can see his face, are the jurors, the people in the overflow rooms, the judge, and the attorneys. We're all behind him.
So it makes sense that the sketches vary from one artist to another. Compare this one by Collins to this one done by another sketch artist. It's a challenging job, particularly so in this case.
Sometimes defendants are eager to turn around and eager to say, make a comment or show themselves or show their expression. He isn't. He doesn't change. He just looks straight ahead all the time.
An artist's interpretation, it's the closest cameras get to the courtroom action. Stephanie Leiden, WGBH News.
When it comes to public access, why are the federal courts stuck in another century? Joining me to discuss just that are Tom Finneran, former Massachusetts House Speaker, Dan Roy Henry Sr., he's co-founder of the DJ Dream Fund, and Nancy Gertner, former U.S. federal judge for 17 years. Good to see you, all three of you.
Thanks.
Start with you, since you sat in one of those courtrooms. Why shouldn't there be cameras in your courtrooms?
You're preaching to the choir here. There should be cameras. The public today means through screens. In other words, public when the republic was founded meant opening up a courtroom to whomever could squeeze into a small courtroom. Today, it clearly means visual transmission. And calling it cameras is also sort of dopey in a way. We're no longer talking about great hulking cameras. We're talking about small devices. We're talking about the capacity to do streaming video, to wrap it up for the day, put it on the website of the court so that anyone can download it. It doesn't make a particle of sense.
Tom Finneran, you've been in courtrooms in a number of capacities.
That's true.
What's your take on this thing?
I respectfully disagree with Judge Gertner.
How so? Why?
I think it changes the dynamic of everyone in that room, starting with the judges. They're probably going to be the least affected, but nonetheless, they will be affected. I think the lawyers become more histrionic and more demonstrative, playing to the camera and exciting biases and prejudices. And worst of all, I think the jurors could be very well intimidated. We lose sight of the fact, Jim.
Jurors aren't going to be on camera, right?
Well, jurors will, notwithstanding stern warning or instruction from judges on a repetitive basis, I believe they'll avail themselves of the opportunity to see what they already saw. Oh, gee, it's going to be on the 11 o'clock news tonight, or the 6 o'clock news, or whatever it might be. And Judge Gertner knows this so well, as does Dan. We're talking about the most serious possible matters in kind of the human realm of activity.
But the state
liberty,
courts,
freedom,
but
life,
the state
death.
Court, every single state court has cameras, and the state courts deal with rape and murder. The federal court, this is a very unusual case for federal court. Most of the time we were dealing with things that were not so salacious.
How about answering that question before we get to Dan? Why, should we get rid of them in the state courts too? You practiced in the state courts.
I've practiced in the state courts, and I've seen a situation in which somebody who has a bad moment, I'm talking about a moment, her career was destroyed.
Who's that?
Judge Lopez.
Oh, Judge Maria Lopez.
Judge Lopez.
So you want to
She had
break the
a bad
tie here?
moment. A very good lawyer, very good judge.
I have a belief as to where you'll end up, but I'm not sure. Where do you end up?
Yeah, I mean, I come down with the judge. I mean, I think that look, if our justice system really relies on transparency, then one of the best ways to drive accountability in the justice system is to have transparency, and that's to bring Cameras in the courts. It's unfiltered. I mean, I respect and value the work of artists and the folks who are live tweeting in the case of the Sarnaev trial. We ought to be able to see it. We ought to be able to see it. And if 55% of what people communicate is communicated non-verbally, then we need to understand what's happening non-verbally to really understand where people are in the case.
How about that, Tom Finner?
It's an interesting argument, but I'd go back to the jurors. The jurors are the ones who have the essential constitutional duty and function, and I don't want them to be influenced in any particular way. That all of a sudden, Channel 5, in order to bump their ratings, decides to not only broadcast the proceedings, but to ask for the polls. How would you vote if you were a juror? What, are you kidding me? Then you read or hear that 87% of our respondents said that guy's guilty?
But that's
Judge Gardner.
Well, we already have massive over-the-top press for everything. You already have jurors that want to tweet and post on Facebook. We already have that surrounding the court. In one sense, I'd rather have accurate information out there than to have them go to the distortions that they would see when reporters have to filter what's going on. But we already have to deal with that.
How about a compromise? Why not leave it to the discretion of people like Judge Gertner? Let the judge decide both what cases can be covered and if certain testimony should be covered and certain shouldn't. Why not trust her? We trust her with decisions, with outcomes.
Now watch it, Tom. Watch it.
This is the camel's nose under the tent. How do you stop? Where do you stop? What judge then, once it's allowed, although up to her discretion or his discretion, once it's allowed, on what basis would they ever say no to the public or to the
on what
media
basis did they ever say certain evidence can't be allowed in the case because they think it's to be prejudicial?
As the four of us have watched television evolve over these last several years, do we feel that we're well informed or do we feel that we're manipulated?
But all the
do
more
we feel as if they played to the lowest common denominator at virtually all times?
Wait, but Tom, in this trial, for example, Tsarnaev, cameras are not allowed in the courtroom, but the U.S. Attorney's Office has happily released all the videos. So the public is getting live stuff. It's just not what's going on in the courtroom, which is tremendously embarrassing.
Dan, can I get back to you? Sorry.
We know the defendant here. There's no defendant privacy issue. We know what he did. His counsel admitted to his involvement, and there's no need to protect his identity from the public for concerns of his safety. I don't know why we're not being exposed to the reality of this trial in this particular case. Yeah, there are cases where maybe it's a child. A child should be protected, or victims' rights, or the accused should be protected for some reason. In this particular case, it seems like transparency would be better.
No judge is going to allow a kid's testimony. I want to stay with you for a second. Have you always believed this? I mean, for those who don't know, and people are saying, I know that face, your son DJ was killed by a cop more than 4 years ago in New York State. There was a grand jury that I know you and your wife and supporters feel was cooked, not your words, mine, in terms of outcome, failed to indict the cop who shot your son. Did you feel this way before that closed proceeding?
Absolutely.
You felt this way all along?
And it drove me crazy that was such a close proceeding.
The grand jury, which is in almost all cases. Back to you, Judge Gardner. There are a couple of women I bet you know relatively well. Elena Kagan, used to be Solicitor General, used to be at Harvard Law School. Sonia Sotomayor. In 2009, Justice Sotomayor, in her confirmation, was in favor of cameras in the courtroom, hoped to convince her colleagues. Now she says it's a temptation that to be used as a stage, as Tom Finneran said, rather than a courtroom. Kagan is now saying, and she's supported as Solicitor General, it might upset the dynamic, just what Speaker Finneran is saying. They don't get it either?
Well, but the major issue here is that for 30, 40 years, the states have had cameras in the court.
Well, they know that. They know that.
And so they're wrong. I respect my chances on the Supreme Court were long ago shot, so they're totally wrong.
Mine too.
I don't have any problem saying that. No, and in addition, what's so ironic is that the courts of appeals, not the Supreme Court, many of the courts of appeals allow cameras.
Federal courts.
That's right.
When I listen to you, Speaker Finneran, it sounds to me like you're still suffering from OJ hangover. I mean, virtually everybody I know, I'm serious, almost everybody I know thinks that Judge Ito was an embarrassment. The conduct, at least his conduct of the case was an embarrassment. And that sort of trickled down 20 years after the fact. Isn't that a piece of it?
Some of that, but that's modern history. I mean, I also think of something a little bit more dated, the Coliseum. Are we supposed to have this kind of a mob of citizens that can be and might be manipulated? To Dan's comment about the I can't even say the name, Tsarnaev, to the ongoing trial. I mean, obviously, it is so extreme in so many dimensions that the points he makes are well taken. I'm more concerned with the more run-of-the-mill case where it is like this. It's give and take, and sometimes it's a key word, it's a key witness, it's a key.
Who's going to televise a run-of-the-mill case? I mean, when's that going to happen? Who's going to watch that?
Who's going to watch that? Well, you'd have to ask the program directors. As I said earlier, I think they go for anything whatsoever as long as it appeals to the
So let me stay with you for one more second.
Common denominator.
Let me stay with you for a second. If you, let's assume your arguments or your concerns are legitimate.
Yeah.
If you have to rely on the public, people who elected people like you, and you trusted them then, to make a decision based upon what they actually see, as opposed to filtered by people like me and like those artists a couple of minutes ago, wouldn't you trust the judgment of the public to see and be grown up and not make horrible decisions?
I would trust the judgment of the jurors, who sit there for every minute of the trial, hear every witness, hopefully paying close attention. That's what I trust. I do not trust a program director who's up against time constraints, rating constraints, sponsor constraints, and the like.
What we're talking about is not what had happened 20 years ago. We now can do gavel-to-gavel coverage, and just as you have a transcript that has the transcript of the proceedings, you have a thing to click on, and you have the entire trial. So the program director may give clips on television, but anyone who wants to can see the whole thing.
Can we end this with this?
But once they do those clips, how does that not begin to distort the jurors' deliberations? They're reading or hearing. 88% of the public want to hang this guy.
Because we have to trust the jurors are not going to be on television.
Judge Gardner, do we all at least agree that Supreme Court proceedings should be televised? You have to agree to that, yes?
I do, because it's on a record.
Fine.